The auctioneer's gavel struck wood with finality. Clara Jennings had just been sold for less than the price of a broken mule. Her own father pocketed the coins without looking back, while her mother turned away and practiced shame. "Barren woman, half price," the crowd jeered. But when a weathered lumberjack named Elias Boone stepped forward with 4 motherless children trailing behind him, nobody laughed anymore. Follow our story to discover how one woman's greatest shame became her greatest triumph. Comment your city below. Let's see how far this tale travels. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty market square of Cedar Ridge, Montana, where livestock and laborers alike were traded with equal indifference. Clara Jennings stood on the makeshift platform, her wrists bound not by rope, but by something far stronger, the crushing weight of shame that pressed down on her shoulders like a millstone. At 23, she should have been tending to her own children, mending her husband's clothes, preparing supper in her own kitchen. Instead, she stood before a crowd of leering strangers while her father, Harold Jennings, negotiated her price with the enthusiasm of a man selling spoiled grain. "She's strong enough," Harold barked to the gathering crowd, his weathered face showing no trace of the man who had once carried her on his shoulders through these very streets. "Can cook, clean, mend, got all her teeth, just can't—" He paused, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "Can't produce young ones. Doctor confirmed it. But for household work, she'll do fine." The crowd murmured, some with pity, most with the kind of cruel amusement that feeds on another's misfortune. Clara kept her eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the horizon, trying to imagine herself anywhere but here. She thought of her childhood dreams, the little house she'd planned to fill with laughter, the garden where her children would play the husband who would look at her with pride. Those dreams had died 2 years ago, when Dr. Morrison had delivered his verdict with clinical detachment: barren, nothing to be done about it. Her husband Thomas had waited exactly 3 weeks before taking up with the miller's daughter. The divorce papers came a month later, and with them Clara's exile back to her parents' home. But even blood couldn't overcome the stigma of a woman who couldn't fulfill her most basic purpose, at least not in Harold Jennings' mind. $20, someone shouted from the crowd. $20, Harold scoffed. "I paid more than that for her wedding dress. She's worth at least 40 wasn't." "For a barren woman," another voice called out. "You're dreaming, old man," Clara's mother. Elizabeth stood at the edge of the crowd, her hands wringing a handkerchief until her knuckles turned white. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Clara saw something flicker there, regret perhaps, or maybe just relief that this shameful chapter would soon close. Elizabeth had borne 8 children. She couldn't understand a daughter who couldn't even manage one. $30 then. Harold countered, his desperation beginning to show. "She's educated, can read and write. That's got to count for something." The crowd laughed, and the sound cut through Clara like shards of glass. Education meant nothing if a woman couldn't provide heirs. She'd learned that lesson well enough when Thomas had thrown her books into the fire, declaring them useless paper for a useless woman. 25 final offer, a portly man in a merchant's coat called out. Clara recognized him. Samuel Henderson, who ran the general store and was known for working his help into the ground. His wife had died last winter, and rumor had it he was looking for someone to mind his 6 unruly children and keep his house while he pursued the young widow Taylor. Harold opened his mouth to accept when a new voice cut through the morning air, deep and steady as mountain stone. $50. The crowd parted like a biblical sea, and Clara saw him for the first time. Elias Boone stood at the edge of the square, his massive frame casting a shadow that seemed to push back against the harsh morning light. His face was weathered by wind and sun, carved by years of hard labor in the lumber camps. Dark hair streaked with premature gray fell past his collar. His clothes were simple but clean, the pants and shirt of a working man who took pride in what little he had. But it was his eyes that made Clara's breath catch. They were the color of pine forests after rain, deep green with flecks of gold, and they looked at her not with pity or desire, but with something she couldn't quite name, recognition perhaps, or understanding. $50. Harold's voice cracked with surprise. "You're Boone, aren't you? The lumberjack from Pike's Mountain." Elias nodded once, his gaze never leaving Clara's face. "That's right." "What's a man like you want with a woman who can't give you sons?" someone shouted from the crowd. "You already got children from your dead wife, don't you?" 4 of them. Elias confirmed his voice, carrying across the square without him having to raise it. And they need someone who knows about more than just birthing babies. They need someone who knows about living. The crowd fell silent. Harold looked between his daughter and the lumberjack, calculating. $50 was more than he'd hoped for, more than enough to cover his debts at the tavern and leave some besides. "Sold," Harold announced, grabbing the coins Elias produced from his pocket without ceremony. "She's yours, Boone, and good riddance." He caught himself, but the damage was done. The final words hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Clara watched her father count the coins twice, his fingers moving with the practiced ease of a man who'd just made the deal of his life. Her mother had already turned away, walking quickly toward their wagon, as if staying another moment might contaminate her with Clara's shame. "Get your things," Elias said quietly, his first words directed at her. "If you have any." Clara's possessions fit in a single canvas bag. 2 dresses, a shawl, her grandmother had knitted a Bible with her name inscribed in the front, and a small wooden box containing her mother's wedding ring. The only thing of value Elizabeth had ever given her pressed into her palm the night before with the words, "Maybe it will bring you better luck than it brought me." As she stepped down from the platform, her legs trembling from standing so long she stumbled. Elias's hand caught her elbow, steady and warm through the thin fabric of her dress. He didn't grab or pull, just supported until she found her balance. "Thank you," she whispered the first word she'd spoken all morning. "Don't thank me yet," he replied, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You don't know what you're walking into." They made their way through the crowd, which parted with a mixture of curiosity and respect. Clara noticed 4 small figures standing by a weathered wagon at the edge of the square. 2 boys and 2 girls ranging from what looked like 6 to perhaps 14 years. They watched her approach with eyes that held too much wariness for their ages. The oldest, a boy with his father's dark hair and serious expression, stepped forward. "Pa, is this her?" "This is Miss Clara," Elias said. "She's coming home with us." "Another one?" The younger boy piped up, earning a sharp elbow from his brother. "Hush, Samuel," the older boy warned. Clara noticed the way they stood protective of each other, closed off from the world. The oldest girl, perhaps 12, held the youngest girl's hand so tightly the little one winced. They'd built walls, these children. She recognized the architecture of those defenses because she'd built similar ones herself. "I'm Clara," she said softly, kneeling down to meet the youngest girl's eyes. "What's your name?" The child looked up at her father, seeking permission. When Elias nodded, she whispered, "Rose." "That's a beautiful name," Clara said. "I had a rose garden once. Maybe we can plant one together." Rose's eyes widened slightly, but before she could respond, the older girl pulled her back. "We should go, Pa. Storm's coming." Clara looked up at the clear blue sky, confused, but Elias was already helping her into the wagon. "Martha's got a sense for weather," he explained. "Never been wrong yet." As they pulled away from the market square, Clara turned back one last time. Her parents' wagon was already disappearing down the opposite road, and the crowd had dispersed, moving on to the next spectacle. The platform where she'd stood remained waiting for the next person whose life would be bartered away. "Don't look back," Elias said quietly. "Nothing good comes from staring at what's already gone." The wagon rolled through the rutted streets of Cedar Ridge, past the church where Clara had been married 5 years ago, past the schoolhouse where she'd once taught before marriage had ended that dream, past the doctor's office where her fate had been sealed. Each landmark was a gravestone for a different version of herself. "Why?" She finally asked the question burning in her throat. "Why did you pay so much?" Elias was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. The children in the back of the wagon were silent too, listening with the intense focus of those who'd learned that adult conversations often determined their fate. "My wife died 2 years ago," he finally said, his hand steady on the reins. "Childbirth fever. The baby didn't make it either. Would have been our 5th. He paused, navigating around a deep rut in the road. "After she was gone, everyone had opinions about what I should do. Marry again quick, they said. Find another woman to give me more sons. As if Margaret could be replaced like a broken axle." Clara heard the pain in his voice, old but still sharp around the edges. "Then the women started coming around. Young ones mostly. their families pushing them forward talking about their wide hips and strong constitutions like they were broodmares at auction. His jaw tightened. One father actually brought a doctor's certificate confirming his daughter's fertility, laid it on my table next to the salt pork like it was a bill of sale. "But you need—" Clara started, then stopped. What did he need? What did any of them need? "I need someone who understands that broken doesn't mean worthless," Elias said simply. "My children don't need another mother trying to replace the one they lost. They need someone who knows what it's like to have the world tell you you're not enough and to keep going anyway." The wagon hit a bump and Rose let out a small cry. Without thinking, Clara turned and reached out to steady her. The girl's hand was tiny and cold in hers. "You're safe," Clara said softly. "Just a bump in the road." "Mama used to say that," Rose whispered, then pulled her hand away as if burned. The rest of the journey continued in silence, but Clara felt the weight of the children's attention. They were measuring her, testing her against some invisible standard. She understood. She'd done the same with every new teacher, every distant relative who'd tried to fill the spaces left by those who'd departed. The road began to climb, winding through stands of pine and fir that grew thicker with each mile. The air changed, became cleaner, sharper. Clara filled her lungs with it, tasting resin and rain on the wind. Martha had been right. Clouds were building on the horizon, dark and heavy with promise. "How far?" Clara asked. "Another hour, maybe less, if the rain holds off," Elias replied. He glanced at her thin dress, seemed about to say something, then reached behind the seat, instead pulling out a worn but clean blanket. "Here. Mountain weather's not like valley weather." She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, inhaling the scent of wood smoke and pine soap. Behind her, she heard Martha whisper to her brother, "She's different from the others." "They all are at first." The boy, she still didn't know his name, replied. "No," Martha insisted. "She's broken too, like us." Clara pretended not to hear, but something loosened in her chest. Broken. Yes, she was that. But maybe in this family of broken pieces, that was exactly what was needed. The first raindrops began to fall as they turned off the main road onto a track that was little more than 2 ruts carved through the forest. The trees pressed close their branches, creating a tunnel of green that filtered the light into something soft and ancient. Clara had never been this far from civilization, never been surrounded by such wild beauty. "Pa, we should hurry," the older boy said, scanning the sky with practiced eyes. "This one's going to be bad." Elias urged the horses faster, but the track was treacherous, full of roots and rocks. The rain intensified, turning from scattered drops to sheets of water that made it hard to see. Clara pulled Rose closer, sharing the blanket, feeling the child's small body shaking from cold or fear she couldn't tell. Through the rain, she glimpsed a structure ahead, a cabin built of logs, solid and square with a stone chimney already releasing smoke into the storm. It wasn't large, but it looked like it could withstand anything nature threw at it. A small barn stood to one side, and what might have been a garden plot to the other, though it was hard to tell through the rain. "Inside, quick!" Elias shouted over the storm, pulling the wagon as close to the cabin as possible. The children scrambled down and ran for the door, Clara following with Rose in her arms. The interior was dark after the gray light outside, and it took her eyes a moment to adjust. When they did, she saw a single large room dominated by a stone fireplace with a ladder leading to what must be a loft above. The furniture was handmade but sturdy, a table with benches, a rocking chair by the fire, shelves lined with preserves and supplies. Everything was clean but worn, speaking of hard use and careful maintenance. "Martha, get the fire built up," Elias commanded, still outside dealing with the horses. "Jacob, help me with the animals. Samuel, show Miss Clara where things are." The children moved with practiced efficiency, and Clara found herself standing in the middle of the room, dripping and uncertain. Rose still clung to her, and she realized she was reluctant to let the child go. "The towels are there," Samuel said, pointing to a wooden chest. "Mama's clothes were—" He stopped, his young face crumpling slightly. "Pa hasn't— They're still in the trunk by the window. You're about her size." Clara set Rose down gently and retrieved towels for both of them. The trunk Samuel had indicated sat beneath an oilcloth window, its wood polish smoothed by years of handling. She hesitated before opening it, feeling like an intruder. "It's okay." Martha said softly, building the fire with expert hands. Mama would want someone to use them. She hated waste. Inside the trunk were dresses simple, but well-made, smelling of lavender and cedar. Clara selected one of brown wool that would be warm and practical and changed behind a curtain strung across one corner of the room. The dress fit as if tailored for her, and she tried not to think about the woman who'd worn it last. When Elias and Jacob came in, soaked through and muddy, Clara had already found the coffee pot and had water heating. It wasn't much, but it was something, a small gesture toward earning her place. "You don't have to," Elias began. "Yes, I do," Clara interrupted, then softened her tone. "Please, let me be useful." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "There's beans and salt pork in the larder. Cornmeal too, if you've a mind to make Johnny cakes." Cooking in an unfamiliar kitchen was like trying to dance to music she couldn't quite hear. Everything was in logical places, but logic designed by someone else's hand. The children watched her every move, cataloging her failures when she burned the first batch of Johnny cakes, when she added too much salt to the beans, when she couldn't find the right pot and had to ask. But she persevered, and eventually a meal appeared on the table. It wasn't fancy, might not even be good, but it was hot and filling. The family ate in silence at first, the only sounds the storm outside and the scrape of spoons on plates. "It's different," Rose finally announced. Clara's heart sank. "I'm sorry, Not bad different," the little girl clarified. "Just different. Mama made things different too from how Grandma did." "Everything's different now," Jacob said quietly, and his siblings nodded in solemn agreement. After dinner, Clara began clearing the table, but Martha joined her without being asked. They worked side by side, the girl showing her where things went without words. The boys took turns hauling water from the rain barrel for washing, and even Rose helped by drying the wooden spoons. "We take turns telling stories after supper," Samuel announced, "when the weather's bad like this. Papa tells the best ones about Paul Bunyan and his blue ox." "I don't know any stories," Clara said, though that wasn't entirely true. She knew plenty of stories, fairy tales and Bible stories and myths from the books Thomas had burned, but those seemed to belong to another person, another life. "Everyone knows stories," Martha said firmly, "even if they don't know they know them." They gathered around the fire, the children arranging themselves on the floor with the ease of long practice. Elias took the rocking chair, and after a moment's hesitation, Clara sat on a low stool near Rose, who immediately scooted closer. "Tell us about the rose garden," the little girl requested, "the one you had before." Clara looked at the expectant faces illuminated by firelight and made a decision. She wouldn't lie to these children, wouldn't pretend to be something she wasn't, but she could give them truth wrapped in story the way all the best tales were told. "Once upon a time," she began, her voice finding a rhythm she'd used in the schoolhouse years ago, "there was a girl who believed that if she could grow the perfect garden, everything else in her life would be perfect too." The children leaned in, even Jacob, who was trying to look disinterested. "She planned this garden for years, drawing pictures of where every flower would go, reading books about soil and seasons. She knew exactly which roses would climb the trellis, which ones would border the walk, which ones would bloom first in spring and last in fall." Thunder rumbled outside, and Rose pressed closer to Clara's knee. When she finally got married and had her own little plot of land, she planted that garden just as she'd dreamed. She tended it every day, pruning and watering, fighting off aphids and black spot. The roses grew, and they were beautiful red ones and pink ones, and even a yellow one she'd mail-ordered from a catalog. "What happened to them?" Martha asked softly. Clara was quiet for a moment, remembering the day she'd come home from the doctor's office to find Thomas had ripped them all out roots, and all declaring he wouldn't have reminders of her failure cluttering up his yard. "Sometimes storms come," she said finally. "Not just rainstorms like this one, but life storms. And sometimes those storms tear up gardens, no matter how carefully they were planted or how well they were tended." "That's sad," Rose whispered. "It was sad," Clara agreed. The girl cried for days, but then she learned something important. She looked at each child in turn. She learned that the beauty wasn't really in the roses themselves. It was in the hoping and the planning and the trying. It was in the mornings spent with dirt under her fingernails and sun on her face. And those things, the storms couldn't take those away. "Could she plant new roses?" Samuel asked. Clara smiled, the first real smile she'd managed all day. That's the thing about gardeners. They always believe in next spring. Elias had been silent through the story, but now he spoke. Your turn, Jacob. What story will you tell? The older boy launched into a tale about a bear that had tried to raid their smokehouse last winter, embellishing until the bear was 10 feet tall and breathing fire. Samuel corrected him at every turn, the two boys arguing good-naturedly about details. Martha told a quieter story about finding an injured bird and nursing it back to health, only to have it fly away without a backward glance. But that was good, she insisted when Samuel called it ungrateful. It meant the bird was healed. That's all that mattered. When it came to Rose's turn, she was already half asleep against Clara's knee. Too tired for stories, Rick, she mumbled. Then it's bedtime, Elias announced, and the children groaned but began preparing for bed with the efficiency of routine. The girls climbed to the loft, the boys to a lean-to room Clara hadn't noticed before. Soon it was just her and Elias by the dying fire. You can have the loft with the girls, he said. I sleep down here, keep the fire going through the night. Clara looked at the rocking chair, the blanket folded over its back. That can't be comfortable. Comfortable enough, he replied. Been doing it since Margaret died. The bed up there, it was ours. Doesn't feel right anymore. She understood that the way spaces could hold ghosts more solid than memories. Thank you, she said. For today. For... She gestured helplessly, unable to find words for what he'd done. I told you not to thank me yet, he reminded her. This life isn't easy. The children, they're good children, but they're hurting. They've had 3 women come try to mother them since Margaret died, and they drove each one away within a month. How? A ghost of a smile crossed his face. They're creative when they want to be. One woman woke up to find her bed full of pine sap. Another found all her petticoats hung from the tallest pine tree. The last one, he shook his head. Let's just say she developed a powerful fear of spiders. They're testing, Clara said, seeing if I'll leave, if it's safe to care. And if you do leave... Clara thought about the platform that morning, about her father's eager counting of coins, about her mother's turn back. Where would I go? That's not an answer. She met his eyes across the dying fire. Yes, it is. I have nowhere to go, Mr. Boone, but more than that... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Those children understand what it's like to lose something that can't be replaced. So do I. Maybe that's enough common ground to build on. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Maybe it is. Breakfast is at dawn. We eat early and work hard. I'm not afraid of hard work. No, he said thoughtfully. I don't believe you are. Clara climbed the ladder to the loft, finding the girls already asleep in their bed. A second bed, larger, stood against the far wall, its quilt turned down as if waiting. Margaret's bed. She sat on its edge, running her hand over the wedding ring quilt, each piece carefully stitched with love and hope for a future that had been cut short. Through the small window, she could see the storm was passing, leaves and branches scattered across the yard like discarded dreams. Tomorrow, she would have to prove herself all over again. Tomorrow, the children would test her. The work would challenge her, and she would probably fail at half of what she attempted. But tonight, for the first time in 2 years, she had a purpose beyond shame. 4 broken children needed someone who understood that broken didn't mean worthless. A man who'd paid $50 not for a servant, but for a chance at healing needed someone who wouldn't try to replace what couldn't be replaced. The rain drummed against the roof, and somewhere below she heard Elias banking the fire, the careful movements of a man who'd learned to move quietly through grief. Rose murmured in her sleep, and Martha's hand reached out unconsciously to comfort her sister. Clara lay down fully dressed, not ready yet to claim the intimacy of nightclothes in this strange new life. The bed smelled of lavender and cedar of dreams, interrupted but not destroyed. She thought of her rose garden torn from the earth roots, exposed to the killing sun. But roots she knew could find new soil if given the chance. Tomorrow would come with its challenges and tests. The children would watch her with wary eyes, waiting for her to prove she was just another temporary disruption in their lives. The work would be hard, the isolation complete, the weight of expectations heavy as mountain stone. But tonight she was no longer standing on a platform being sold to the highest bidder. Tonight she was Clara Jennings, bought for $50, by a man who understood that some things couldn't be measured in currency taken in by children who needed to learn that love could grow in broken soil. The storm moved on, leaving the world washed clean and ready for whatever morning would bring. Clara closed her eyes, and for the first time since Dr. Morrison had pronounced her barren, she allowed herself to hope. Not for the life she'd lost, but for the one that might be possible here in this cabin at the edge of the wilderness, with these people who knew that broken could be the beginning of something stronger than whole. The last thing she heard before sleep took her was an owl calling in the darkness, its voice carrying across the mountain like a blessing or a warning. She couldn't tell which, and perhaps it didn't matter. She was here now for better or worse, and tomorrow would reveal what that truly meant. The rooster's crow came before dawn, but Clara was already awake lying in Margaret's bed and listening to the cabin come alive beneath her. She heard Elias moving quietly below the careful placement of logs on the fire, the soft scrape of the coffee pot being set to boil. These were the sounds of a house that had learned to function despite its grief, each noise a small act of defiance against the silence loss tried to impose. Martha stirred first among the girls, her eyes opening to find Clara watching her. For a moment they simply looked at each other, measuring the space between stranger and whatever might come next. Then Martha nudged Rose awake with practiced gentleness, whispering something Clara couldn't catch. The younger girl's eyes flew open, searching until they found Clara, and something like relief crossed her small face. "You're still here," Rose said, as if Clara might have vanished in the night like a dream upon waking. "Where else would I be?" Clara asked softly, sitting up and smoothing her borrowed dress. It had wrinkled during the night, carrying the impression of her restless sleep. "The last one left in the middle of the night," Martha said matter-of-factly, pulling on her day dress with the efficiency of someone who'd been dressing themselves far too long. "Took Pa's horse and everything. Sheriff brought it back 3 days later, found her trying to sell it in Millerville." Clara absorbed this information while helping Rose with her buttons, the child's fingers still clumsy with sleep. What did she find so terrible that stealing a horse seemed the better option? Martha and Rose exchanged a look that was far too knowing for their ages. "Jacob put a dead raccoon in her trunk," Martha finally admitted, "but she'd already called us heathens and said our mother must have been glad to die to get away from us." The casual cruelty of it made Clara's chest tight. "No wonder the raccoon appeared," she said carefully, "though I imagine your father wasn't pleased." "He made Jacob bury it proper and say words over it," Rose piped up. "Even though it was already dead when Jacob found it, Pa says all creatures deserve respect even when they're being used for mischief." The ladder creaked as they descended, and Clara found the main room transformed by morning light. What had seemed cave-like and protective in last night's storm now revealed itself as something more complex. She could see the careful craftsmanship in the furniture, the way each piece had been shaped to fit perfectly in its space. The walls held shelves she hadn't noticed, lined with books worn soft from reading. A rifle hung above the door, and tools were arranged on pegs with military precision. But it was the small touches that caught her attention, a child's drawing tacked to the wall near the stove. Wildflowers in a cracked vase on the mantel, initials carved into the table's edge where young hands had left their mark. This was a home that had been loved, was still loved, despite the shadow of loss that hung over it. Elias looked up from the stove where he was frying eggs, his expression unreadable. "Morning," he said simply. "Coffee's ready." The boys emerged from their lean-to Jacob's hair, standing in wild directions while Samuel had attempted to slick his down with water. They took their places at the table without speaking, watching Clara navigate the unfamiliar space of their kitchen. She poured coffee with hands that barely trembled, served eggs onto plates she had to search for, found bread in a box she opened by mistake while looking for preserves. Each small failure was noted by 8 eyes that missed nothing, but when she finally sat down with her own plate, she met their gazes steadily. "I'm going to make mistakes," she said, addressing all of them, but looking at Jacob, who seemed to be their unofficial leader. "Probably lots of them. I'll burn food and put things in the wrong places and forget the way you've always done things. But I'm not going anywhere." "Everyone says that," Jacob replied, his voice carefully neutral. "Everyone hasn't been sold by their own father for being broken," Clara said quietly. The words hung in the air like morning mist, visible and undeniable. "I've got nowhere else to go, and more than that, I've got no intention of leaving. So you can test me all you want, but you might as well know from the start that I'm too tired to run and too stubborn to be driven off." Samuel's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Pa told you about the raccoon." "Your sisters did," Clara said, taking a sip of coffee that was strong enough to strip paint. "I've been thinking about what kind of woman would say such things about your mother about you. Seems to me she got off light with just a raccoon." A sound escaped Jacob that might have been a laugh, quickly suppressed. Martha hid a smile behind her cup, and even Elias's stern expression softened slightly. "We've got washing today," he said, changing the subject with the grace of a man who knew when to let sleeping dogs lie. "Martha usually handles it, but—" "I can help," Clara interrupted. "I've done plenty of washing." "The water's got to be hauled from the creek," Martha warned. "It's a quarter mile each way and it takes 12 buckets at least." "Then we'd better get started," Clara said, standing to clear the plates. What followed was perhaps the hardest physical labor Clara had ever done. The path to the creek was steep and rocky, made treacherous by last night's rain. The buckets were heavy, even empty and full. They pulled at her arms until her shoulders screamed. Martha carried 2 at a time with the strength of someone who'd been doing this far too long, while Clara struggled with 1. By the 6th trip, her hands were raw despite the rags Martha had given her to wrap them. By the 8th, her back felt like it might never straighten again. By the 10th, she was seriously questioning her brave words at breakfast. But she kept going, following Martha's steady pace, refusing to be the weak city woman they expected. "Your hands are bleeding," Martha observed as they heated the water over the outdoor fire pit. Clara looked down at her palms marked with broken blisters. "They'll toughen up." "Mama's did," Martha said quietly. "She came from town too, you know. Pa met her when he went to sell lumber. She'd never even seen a chicken up close before she came here." This was the most Martha had said about her mother, and Clara sensed the gift in it. "Was it hard for her at first?" "Pa says she cried every night for a month," Martha admitted, adding soap to the steaming water. "But only after we were all asleep. During the day she smiled and learned and pretended her hands weren't torn to pieces and her back didn't ache. Pa finally made her stop pretending, told her it was okay to be human." They worked in companionable silence after that, scrubbing clothes on the washboard until Clara's knuckles joined her palms in bleeding protest. Rose appeared periodically to help hang clothes on the line stretched between 2 pines, her small fingers surprisingly nimble with the wooden pins. It was during one of these appearances that trouble arrived in the form of Mrs. Henderson from town, the merchant's wife driving a smart little buggy up the rough track with determination that spoke of significant gossip to share. "So it's true," she said, without preamble, eyeing Clara with the kind of satisfaction reserved for those who love being right about the worst in people. "Harold Jennings actually sold his own daughter. The whole town's talking about it." Clara straightened from the washboard, her back protesting the movement. Before she could speak, Rose piped up with innocent directness. "Pa bought her fair and square, paid more than anyone else would." Mrs. Henderson's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. "Child, it's not... You can't just buy people." "Sure you can," Samuel said, appearing from wherever he'd been lurking. "Saw it myself. There was a platform and everything. Man said she was barren and couldn't make babies, so Pa bought her to make breakfast instead." The woman's face turned an alarming shade of purple. "Elias Boone, I demand to speak with you this instant." Elias emerged from the barn, where he'd been working, his expression calm, despite the hay in his hair and the sweat on his brow. "Mrs. Henderson, what brings you all the way up here? This arrangement," she sputtered, gesturing at Clara. "It's indecent, unmarried people living under the same roof, and you buying her like livestock. What kind of example are you setting for these children?" "The kind where we take care of each other," Elias said evenly. "Miss Jennings is here as housekeeper and help with the children. Everything's proper and above board." "Proper?" Mrs. Henderson's voice rose to a pitch that probably scared birds from trees. "You bought her at a public sale. Her own father sold her." "And what would you have had me do?" Elias asked, his voice taking on an edge Clara hadn't heard before. "Leave her there to be bought by someone else. Someone who might not treat her with respect, or maybe no one at all, so Harold could drag her home and try again next week." "That's not... I mean, Mrs. Henderson faltered, then rallied. She should be with family. The family that sold her. Clara spoke for the first time, her voice steady, despite the trembling in her hands. The mother who turned her back, the father who counted coins while strangers bid on his daughter like a milk cow. She stepped forward, meeting the woman's eyes. Yes, Mr. Boone paid for me. He paid $50 to give me dignity when my own blood relatives wouldn't give me the time of day, which makes him more family than anyone who shares my name. Mrs. Henderson's mouth worked soundlessly, but Martha delivered the killing blow with the casual ruthlessness of a child who'd heard too much adult cruelty. Besides Mrs. Henderson, didn't your husband try to buy her too? For $25. At least Pa paid fair price. The woman fled in a cloud of dust and indignation, her buggy bouncing dangerously on the rough track in her haste to escape. The family stood in silence for a moment, then Samuel started giggling, which set off Rose, and soon even Jacob was smiling. She'll tell everyone in town, Clara said quietly to Elias. Let her, he replied. They'll talk anyway. Always do. He paused, studying her bleeding hands. Martha, get the salve from the medicine box. Those hands need tending. I'm fine, Clara protested. No, he said firmly. You're not. And there's no shame in admitting it. Strength isn't about pretending you're not hurt. It's about keeping going despite the hurt. But we take care of wounds here, not ignore them until they fester. Martha returned with a tin of salve that smelled of pine and something medicinal. Her touch was gentle as she applied it to Clara's ravaged hands, wrapping them in clean cloth with the efficiency of practice. Who taught you to do this so well? Clara asked. Mama, Martha said simply. She said every woman should know how to tend wounds because life guarantees you'll have plenty to tend. The afternoon brought different challenges. Clara attempted to patch the boys' torn trousers with stitches, so Crooked Samuel said they looked like a drunk spider had done them. She tried to help Jacob with his arithmetic lessons, only to discover he was far ahead of where she'd expected. She burned the cornbread and undercooked the beans, producing a dinner that was barely edible. But the children ate it without complaint, and when Elias reached for a third piece of the burned cornbread, Clara caught the tiny smile he tried to hide. It's awful, she said. Had worse, he replied. First month after Margaret died, I tried to make soup. Somehow ended up with something that could have been used to tar roofs. We ate it anyway. We survived on berries and jerky for a week after that, Jacob added, until Pa figured out how to actually cook. After dinner, as Clara struggled to mend by lamplight, Rose climbed into her lap, uninvited, settling there like a cat claiming its spot. The weight of the child was unexpected comfort, warm and trusting. Will you tell us another story, Rose asked, about gardens? Clara set aside the hopelessly mangled mending. What kind of garden story would you like? A happy one, Rose said firmly, where things grow. Clara thought for a moment, her arms unconsciously tightening around the child. Once there was a woman who thought she couldn't grow anything. Every seed she planted seemed to fail. Her neighbors whispered that she had black thumbs instead of green ones, that she was cursed to kill everything she touched. The children gathered closer, even Jacob abandoning his pretense of disinterest. One day a storm washed out the road near her house, and a traveling merchant got stuck. She offered him shelter, and in thanks, he gave her a handful of strange seeds. These are special, he said. They grow in the dark in the places where nothing else will take root. That's not real, but Samuel protested. Nothing grows in the dark. Some things do, Clara said softly. Mushrooms grow in darkness. Seeds germinate underground before they ever see light. And sometimes the most beautiful things grow in the darkest places of our hearts. She continued the story, weaving a tale of the woman who planted those seeds in the shadow of her house, where the sun never reached. How she watered them with tears at first, then with hope. How strange pale flowers bloomed glowing softly in the darkness, attracting night-flying moths that turned out to be fairy messengers. And what did the fairies want? Martha asked, caught up despite herself. They wanted to thank her, Clara said, because those flowers, they only grew for people who understood that beautiful things could come from sorrow. The woman's garden became a sanctuary for all the night creatures, all the things that others feared or overlooked. And she learned that her black thumbs weren't a curse at all. They were just meant for a different kind of gardening. I want to grow night flowers, Rose announced sleepily. Maybe we can find some seeds, Clara suggested. There are real flowers that bloom at night, moonflowers and evening primrose and night-blooming cereus. Mama tried to grow moonflowers once, Martha said quietly. They never bloomed. Sometimes plants are just waiting for the right gardener, Clara said gently. Maybe we could try again. Later, after the children had climbed to their beds and the cabin had settled into nighttime quiet, Clara found herself alone with Elias again by the dying fire. Her hands throbbed despite the salve, and every muscle in her body ached from the day's labor. "You did well today," he said quietly, "with Mrs. Henderson." "I've had practice with judgment," Clara replied. 2 years of practice, actually. "It doesn't get easier," he said. "The talk, the looks, the assumptions about why you're here, what we're doing. Are you worried about it?" He considered the question, poking at the fire with a stick. "I'm worried about the children. They've lost enough without losing their good name, too." "Then maybe we should give people something else to talk about," Clara suggested. "Something that makes sense to them." He looked at her sharply. "What are you suggesting?" "Nothing improper," she said quickly. "But if I'm going to be here, really be here, then we need to make it clear what my position is. Not just housekeeper, but governess, maybe teacher. The children need education, especially the girls. Martha's smart enough for proper schooling, and Rose needs to learn her letters." "You were a teacher," Elias remembered. Before, Clara agreed. "I was a lot of things before, but maybe some of those things could be useful now." He was quiet for a long moment. "The pay would be the same, room and board, nothing more." "I didn't expect more." "And you'd have to really teach them, not just pretend at it. Jacob's quick with numbers, but his writing's atrocious. Samuel can barely read. The girls need everything arithmetic, writing, geography, history." "I can do that," Clara said, feeling something spark in her chest that might have been purpose. "I'd like to do that." "Then we'll tell people you're the governess," Elias decided. "Let Mrs. Henderson spread that around town. A governess is respectable, proper." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire popping and settling. Finally, Clara asked the question that had been nagging at her all day. "The other women who came, were they all looking to marry you?" Elias's jaw tightened. "Most of them. Their families were anyway. Seemed to think a man with 4 children and a good piece of land was too good a prospect to stay single. But you weren't interested." "I buried my wife 2 years ago," he said quietly. "Buried my heart with her, if I'm being honest. These women, they wanted something I don't have to give anymore. They wanted romance and promises and a future that looks like the past. All I've got is days to get through and children to raise." "That's all I want too," Clara said softly. "Days to get through. Purpose. A place where being broken doesn't disqualify me from being useful." He looked at her, and really looked at her, and she saw recognition in his eyes. 2 damaged people who understood that some wounds never healed, just scarred over enough to bear weight again. "The children won't make it easy," he warned. "Today was gentle compared to what they're capable of." "Good," Clara said firmly. "Easy would mean they didn't care enough to fight. I'd rather have their worse than their indifference." As if to test her words, a crash came from the loft, followed by giggling and Martha's sharp whisper to be quiet. Elias started to rise, but Clara put a hand on his arm. "Let me," she said. She climbed the ladder to find all 4 children huddled on the girl's bed, obviously having been eavesdropping through the floorboards. "Governess," Jacob said, his voice skeptical. "You're going to teach us, if you'll let me," Clara said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Though I should warn you, I'm a terrible student myself. Just today I learned that washing clothes here is nothing like washing clothes in town. That mountain weather changes faster than you can blink, and that burned cornbread is still food if you're hungry enough. You also learned that Mrs. Henderson is a busybody," Samuel added helpfully. "I suspected that already," Clara said with a small smile. "But yes, that too." "What else will you teach us?" Rose asked, crawling into Clara's lap again as if she belonged there. "Reading, writing, arithmetic for certain," Clara said, "but also maybe some things that aren't in books, like how to grow night-blooming flowers, or how to make bread that isn't burned, or how to be strong enough to stay when everything in you wants to run. Mama used to say staying was harder than leaving, Martha said quietly. Your mama was a wise woman, Clara said, and brave. It takes a special kind of courage to build a life in a place like this. Are you brave? Rose asked sleepily. Clara thought about the morning standing on that platform, about her father's eager counting of coins, about choosing to climb into a stranger's wagon and travel into the unknown, about facing down Mrs. Henderson with her hands bleeding and her future uncertain. I'm trying to be, she said honestly. Some days that's all any of us can do, try to be brave enough for whatever comes next. She tucked them all back into their proper beds, even the boys who protested they weren't babies. As she turned to go back down the ladder, Jacob's voice stopped her. Miss Clara. The moonflowers Mama tried to grow the seeds might still be in the barn. She saved everything in that old seed box. Thank you, Clara said softly. We'll look tomorrow. Back downstairs, Elias had banked the fire and set out the things for morning, the coffee pot, the pan for biscuits, the bucket for fresh water. These small acts of preparation spoke of a man who'd learned to armor himself against each new day with routine. They were listening, Clara reported. They always do, Elias said with something that was almost fondness. Part of why the other women left, I think. No privacy in a cabin this small. Privacy's overrated to some of us, Clara said. I had plenty of privacy the last 2 years, just me and my shame alone in my father's house. I'll take a lack of privacy with purpose over private purposelessness, any day. She started up the ladder, then paused. Mr. Boone, thank you for taking a chance on someone broken. We're all broken here, Miss Jennings, he said quietly. Maybe that's what makes us fit. That night, Clara lay in Margaret's bed again, but it felt less like trespassing and more like borrowing. Her hands throbbed. Her back ached, and tomorrow would bring new challenges. Teaching children who might not want to learn, facing more judgment from town, trying again to cook edible food. But Rose had sat in her lap twice. Martha had tended her wounds, Samuel had defended her to Mrs. Henderson, and Jacob had offered her his mother's seeds. Small victories perhaps, but victories nonetheless. Through the window, she could see stars scattered across the mountain sky like spilled salt. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called, and its mate answered. Even here in this wilderness of grief and hard work, things found each other. Broken things especially, it seemed, had a way of recognizing their own kind. Tomorrow she would look for those moonflower seeds. She would teach the children whatever they would let her teach. She would haul water and burn food and face whatever tests they devised. She would earn her place here, one blister, one lesson, one small trust at a time. The thought should have been daunting, but instead Clara found herself almost eager for morning. For the first time in 2 years, she had something to wake up for besides shame. She had children who needed her broken understanding, a man who valued survival over perfection, and the possibility of moonflowers that might bloom in darkness. It wasn't the life she'd planned, wasn't the dream she'd nursed through girlhood. But maybe like the woman in her story, she was meant for a different kind of garden. The kind that grew in shadow, tended by hands that had learned to be gentle with damaged things because they knew what it was like to be damaged themselves. The cabin settled around her with small creaks and sighs, and Clara closed her eyes, listening to the breathing of children who were learning to trust the movements of a man who was learning to hope, and the whisper of wind through pines that seemed to say, broken things can still grow, still bloom, still matter. Tomorrow would come with its challenges, but tonight Clara Jennings was exactly where she needed to be. The moonflower seeds were exactly where Jacob had said they'd be, tucked in a corner of the barn in a wooden box marked with Margaret's careful handwriting. Clara held them up to the morning light streaming through the barn door, these tiny promises of beauty that had never fulfilled their potential. She understood the feeling intimately. 3 weeks had passed since Mrs. Henderson's visit, and Clara had settled into a rhythm that felt almost like belonging. The children still tested her. Samuel had put a garter snake in her wash basin just yesterday, but their pranks had taken on an almost affectionate quality, as if they were including her in a family joke rather than trying to drive her away. She was contemplating where to plant the moonflowers when she heard the wagon approaching. The children were at their lessons in the cabin. Elias was felling trees on the north ridge, and visitors were rare enough to be concerning. Clara stepped out of the barn, shading her eyes against the morning sun, and her heart dropped to her stomach. The wagon carried 3 people she'd hoped never to see again: her ex-husband, Thomas, his new wife, Patricia, and her father, Harold. Patricia's belly was round with pregnancy, displayed prominently as if it were a trophy. Clara's hand went unconsciously to her own flat stomach, that barren landscape that had defined her worth in their eyes. "Well, well," Thomas said, climbing down from the wagon with the swagger of a man who thought he owned the world. "Clara, you're looking rough." She glanced down at herself, the patched dress, the work-worn hands, the dirt under her fingernails from the garden she'd been preparing. Yes, she supposed she did look rough compared to Patricia's pristine yellow dress and carefully arranged curls. "What are you doing here?" Clara asked, proud that her voice remained steady. "Came to see what rock bottom looks like," Patricia said sweetly, her hand resting on her swollen belly in a gesture that was anything but unconscious. "The whole valley's talking about poor Clara Jennings sold like a broodmare and working as a servant for some mountain hermit." "Governess," Clara corrected quietly. "I'm the children's governess." Thomas laughed, an ugly sound that brought back too many memories of similar laughter directed at her failures. "Governess, is that what he's calling it?" "Come now, Clara, we all know what men want with women like you, the ones who can't do their proper duty." Harold hadn't said a word yet, but he was examining the property with calculating eyes. Clara knew that look. He was assessing value, determining worth, counting potential coins. "This is a nice piece of land," Harold finally said. "Boone's done well for himself. Prime timber, good water access. Must be worth a pretty penny." "More than $50, certainly," Thomas added with a smirk. "Though I suppose that's all you were worth, isn't it, Clara?" The children appeared in the cabin doorway, drawn by the voices. Rose immediately ran to Clara, wrapping her arms around Clara's legs in a protective gesture that made Clara's heart swell. Martha followed more slowly, her eyes wary, while the boys flanked them like small guards. "Who are they?" Rose asked loudly. "Nobody important," Clara said, running a gentle hand over the child's hair. Patricia's laugh tinkled like broken glass. "Oh, how precious! The barren woman playing mother to another woman's children. It's almost tragic, really." "What's barren mean?" Rose asked innocently. Before Clara could respond, Thomas answered with cruel casualness. "It means she's broken little girl. Can't have babies. Useless as a woman, really." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara felt the children stiffen around her, their protective circle tightening. She wanted to run, to hide, to disappear into the forest and never come back. But Rose's small hand found hers, and Martha stepped closer to her other side, and suddenly running wasn't an option anymore. "She's not broken," Samuel said firmly, his young voice carrying surprising authority. "She fixed my torn reader and taught me to cipher, and makes the best apple dumplings we've ever had." "And she tells the best stories," Rose added, "about gardens that grow in the dark and ladies who save knights instead of the other way around." "She stayed," Jacob said quietly, but his words carried the most weight. "When everyone else left, she stayed." Patricia's perfect face twisted with something ugly. "How sweet! The unwanted woman and the motherless brats playing house together." That's when Clara heard it, the rhythmic thud of an axe being buried in wood with considerably more force than necessary. Elias was coming, and he was angry. She'd never seen him truly angry, had only witnessed his quiet disappointments and controlled frustrations. But the sound of that axe spoke of rage barely contained. He emerged from the tree line like something out of the wilderness itself, sweat-soaked and sawdust covered the axe still in his hand. His eyes took in the scene, Clara surrounded by his children, the 3 unwelcome visitors, the way Patricia's hand rested possessively on her belly and his jaw tightened to granite. "Mr. Jennings," he said with icy politeness. "Surprised to see you here, considering you washed your hands of your daughter so thoroughly." Harold had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "Just wanted to check that she was settling in properly." "You wanted to see if there was any way to squeeze more money from the situation," Elias corrected bluntly. "The answer's no. Transaction's complete. You have no business here." Thomas stepped forward, his chest puffed out like a rooster's. "Now see here, Boone, we have every right to check on Clara's welfare. After all, she was my wife. Was Elias interrupted. Past tense. And from what I understand, you threw her away the moment she couldn't give you what you wanted. Like a tool that's broken, right? Except tools can be broken. People can't. They can be damaged, hurt, wounded, but not broken. Not unless they choose to be. He moved closer to Clara and the children, his presence solid as a mountain. Clara Jennings has more worth in her little finger than you three have in your entire bodies. She teaches my children tens my house brings light to places that have been dark for 2 years. She's worth 100 of you, and I got her for $50, which makes her the best bargain I've ever made. Patricia's face had gone red. How dare you? How dare I what? Elias asked softly, dangerously. Speak truth. Value someone for more than their ability to breed. See worth where you see waste. He looked directly at Thomas. You're a fool. You had gold and threw it away for brass because it was shinier. She's barren, Thomas said, as if that explained everything. She's here, Elias countered. Every morning, no matter how hard the day before was. She's here when Rose has nightmares, when Martha needs help with her sewing, when Samuel struggles with his letters, when Jacob needs someone to understand his silence. Where were you when she needed understanding? Where was any of you when she was drowning in shame you helped pour on her? Clara found her voice, then strengthened by his defense and the children's presence. Thomas, you got what you wanted. A wife who could give you children. Father, you got your money. Patricia, you got a husband. You all got exactly what you thought you needed. Why does it matter what I have? Because you should be suffering. Patricia burst out, then seemed shocked by her own honesty. You should be alone and miserable, not this, not surrounded by children who adore you and a man who defends you. The truth of it hung in the air like smoke. They hadn't come to check on her welfare. They'd come to feed on her misery, to confirm that she was as worthless as they'd declared her to be. Finding her building something like contentment was unbearable to them. I think you should leave, Clara said quietly. There's nothing for you here. You heard her. Elias added, the axe still casual in his hand, though everyone was aware of its presence. Thomas's face twisted with fury. This isn't over. You can't just... Yes, Elias said simply. We can. This is my land. These are my children, and Clara is under my protection. You come here again, any of you, and I'll have the sheriff deal with you for trespassing. And Harold... He looked at Clara's father with disgust. You ever try to sell another human being, daughter or not, and I'll make sure everyone from here to California knows exactly what kind of man you are. Harold grabbed Thomas's arm, pulling him toward the wagon. Come on, we've seen what we came to see. As they climbed back into their wagon, Patricia couldn't resist one last barb. Enjoy playing house while it lasts, Clara. When he realizes what a burden you are when those children grow up and don't need a governess anymore, where will you be then? Clara felt the words like physical blows, but before she could respond, Rose's voice piped up clear and strong. She'll be Mama. That's where she'll be. The word hung in the air like a bell's chime. Mama. Rose had said it with such certainty, such fierce possession, that even Patricia fell silent. The wagon rolled away in a cloud of dust and wounded pride, leaving them standing in front of the cabin like survivors of a storm. Clara's knees suddenly felt weak, and she would have fallen if Elias hadn't steadied her with a hand on her elbow. Rose, she said softly, you don't have to... But I want to, Rose interrupted. Is that okay? Can I call you Mama? Not instead of my real Mama, but along with... Clara looked at Elias, seeking permission or denial. She wasn't sure which. His eyes were unreadable, but he nodded once slightly. If you want to, Clara whispered, kneeling down to Rose's level. If it feels right to you. Rose threw her arms around Clara's neck, and suddenly all the children were there, even Jacob, who usually held himself apart. They surrounded her with their warm, living presence, these children who knew what it was like to be declared not enough. Inside, Elias said gruffly. All of you, lessons aren't done for the day. The children scattered, but Martha lingered for a moment. They were wrong, she said quietly, about you being broken, wrong about everything. After the girl disappeared inside, Clara and Elias stood in the yard, the morning sun warming their faces. Thank you, Clara said. For what you said. Meant every word, he replied. They had no right to come here, no right to speak to you that way. Patricia was right about one thing, Clara said, voicing the fear that had taken root. What happens when the children don't need a governess anymore, when they're grown and gone? Elias was quiet for a long moment, then said something that surprised her. Margaret asked me the same thing once. What would happen when the children were grown? Would we still have purpose, still have reason to be together beyond raising them? He paused, looking at the cabin where the sounds of lessons resuming filtered through the windows. I told her that children were just the first chapter of our story, not the whole book. But your book with her ended, Clara said gently. It did, he agreed, but that doesn't mean I can't start a new one. Different story, different chapters, but still worth reading. He looked at her, then really looked at her. You're not here just for the children, Clara. You're here because we need you, all of us, even me. The admission hung between them fragile as spun glass. Before Clara could respond, a cry came from the cabin. Samuel had apparently put something down Martha's dress, causing chaos to erupt. I should go, Clara said. We should go, Elias corrected. Can't have the governess managing all the discipline. That evening, after a day that felt like a week, Clara found herself in the barn with the moonflower seeds still in her pocket. The children had been especially clingy after the morning's confrontation, even Jacob allowing her to help him with his writing. They'd made a special dinner together, everyone contributing something, and the result had been edible, if not elegant. She was studying the barn wall, thinking about where to plant the climbing vines, when she heard footsteps. It was Elias, carrying a lantern and a bundle of something. Thought you might need these, he said, producing a collection of small wooden stakes and wire. For training the vines. Margaret saved them, but never got to use them. They worked together in companionable silence, setting up the structure that would support the moonflowers when they grew. If they grew. Clara tried not to think about that possibility, about another failure to add to her collection. They'll grow, Elias said, reading her thoughts. Sometimes things just need the right conditions. Right time, right place, right gardener. What if I'm not the right gardener? You are, he said with such certainty that she almost believed him. As they finished setting the last stake, they heard voices from the cabin. The children were arguing about something, their voices carrying on the night air. But it wasn't angry arguing, it was the kind of spirited debate that spoke of comfort, of family, of feeling safe enough to disagree. Rose really wants to call you Mama, Elias said quietly. Has since last week, but she was afraid to ask. What about the others? They'll find their own way, he said. Martha's not ready, may never be. The boys are torn between loyalty to Margaret's memory and their need for mothering. But Rose barely remembers Margaret. You're the only mother she really knows. Clara felt the weight of that responsibility heavier than any bucket of water she'd hauled. I don't know how to be a mother. I couldn't even become one the normal way. There's no normal way, Elias said. Every parent fumbles through, it makes mistakes, figures it out as they go. The only difference is you're honest about not knowing. They stood there in the barn doorway, looking up at the stars that were just beginning to appear. The same stars that had witnessed her humiliation at the market, her father's betrayal, her ex-husband's cruelty. But also the stars that had seen Elias step forward with $50 and a chance at dignity. I'm going to plant them tomorrow, Clara decided. The moonflowers. Even if they don't bloom, at least I'll have tried. They'll bloom, Elias said again. Sometimes the most beautiful things come from the hardest struggles. A scream suddenly pierced the night, not fear but frustration. Samuel had apparently hidden Martha's needlework and was refusing to reveal its location. Clara and Elias shared a look that was part exasperation, part fondness. I'll handle Samuel, Elias said. You might want to check on Rose. She usually hides under the bed when the older ones fight. Clara found Rose exactly where Elias had predicted, curled up with her rag doll beneath the bed in the loft. Come out, sweetheart, Clara coaxed. It's just your brothers and sister being silly. Rose emerged slowly, dust bunnies in her hair. Were those people really your family? The mean ones who came today. By blood, yes, Clara said, settling the child in her lap. But family's more than blood, I'm learning. Papa says you're staying forever, Rose said. Is that true? Clara thought about Patricia's cutting words, about the uncertainty of the future, about all the ways this could go wrong. But then she thought about Elias defending her with an axe in his hand, about Martha teaching her to bind wounds, about Jacob offering his mother seeds, about Samuel declaring she made the best apple dumplings. "Yes," she said firmly, "I'm staying forever." Rose relaxed against her, satisfied with this answer. "Good, because I already told everyone at church that I have a new mama." Mrs. Henderson made a face like she swallowed a lemon. Clara laughed, surprising herself with the genuine joy of it. "I bet she did." "She said it wasn't proper, but I told her Papa bought you fair and square, so that makes you ours." Rose paused. "That's right, isn't it? You're ours now." "Yes," Clara said softly, holding the child closer. "I'm yours, and you're mine, all of you." The next morning brought another test, though of a different kind. Clara woke to find blood on her sheets, her monthly courses arriving with their usual painful reminder of her body's betrayal. She'd learned to hide the pain from Thomas, who saw it as another sign of her failure. But hiding anything in a cabin with 6 people was nearly impossible. Martha noticed first, finding Clara bent double over the wash basin trying to clean the sheets before anyone else woke. "You're hurting," the girl said. It wasn't a question. "It's nothing," Clara managed through gritted teeth. Martha disappeared and returned with a cup of something that smelled vile. Willow bark tea. Mama drank it for the same thing. Said it was the only thing that helped. Clara accepted the cup, gratefully touched by the girl's matter-of-fact kindness. "Your mother taught you a lot about healing." "She said women had to take care of each other," Martha replied, helping Clara carry the sheets outside. "Because sometimes we're the only ones who understand certain kinds of pain." They worked together in the pre-dawn light, and Martha shared something she'd never spoken of before. "Mama lost 3 babies before Rose, after she had us. They just didn't take hold. She cried every time, even though Papa said it was God's will." Clara's hand stilled on the wet fabric. "That must have been so hard for her. She told me once that losing what you have is different from never having it at all, but both hurt in their own way." Martha looked at Clara directly. "She would have liked you, I think. You understand about different kinds of hurt." By the time the others woke, Clara had herself under control, though the pain still cramped through her abdomen in waves. Elias took one look at her pale face and sent the boys to do her morning chores without being asked. He didn't say anything directly, but she caught him making her tea throughout the day, the same bitter willow bark brew Margaret had relied on. That afternoon, while the children were practicing their letters, a different kind of visitor arrived. Dr. Morrison, the same man who had pronounced her barren 3 years ago, rode up on his gray mare, medical bag in hand. "Miss Jennings," he said, tipping his hat. "Or should I say Mrs. Boone?" "Miss Jennings," she corrected firmly. "I'm the governess here." His eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't comment. "I see. Well, I'm here to check on the children. Elias asked me to come by, make sure they're all healthy before winter sets in." Clara watched him examine each child with professional thoroughness, his hands gentle despite his formal manner. When he finished, he paused beside her. "You look well," he said quietly. "Better than when I last saw you." "The last time you saw me, you were destroying my life," Clara said evenly. He had the grace to flinch. "I was giving a medical opinion, what others did with that information." "You knew exactly what would happen," Clara interrupted. "You knew Thomas would cast me aside. You knew my worth would be reduced to nothing. You knew, and you announced it anyway in front of him without any gentleness or care for what it would mean." Dr. Morrison was quiet for a moment. "You're right," he finally said. "I could have handled it with more compassion. I've learned since then that there are ways to deliver hard truths that don't destroy people." He paused. "I'm sorry." The apology surprised her. "Why now?" "Because I see you here with these children who clearly adore you. And I realize that motherhood isn't just about biology. It's about presence, patience, love." He gathered his things to leave, then turned back. "For what it's worth, Miss Jennings, I think you've found your place. These children are lucky to have you." After he left, Clara stood in the yard for a long moment, feeling something shift inside her chest. An apology she'd never expected to receive, an acknowledgement she'd never thought to hear. It didn't erase the past, but somehow it made the present feel more solid. That evening, as she planted the moonflower seeds along the barn wall, the whole family joined her. Even Elias abandoned his usual evening woodwork to help showing the boys how to create proper holes for planting while Martha and Rose carefully placed each seed. "When will they bloom?" Rose asked. "If they grow not until late summer," Clara said. "They need time to establish themselves to grow strong enough to support flowers." "Like you," Jacob said quietly, then flushed red when everyone looked at him. "I mean, you needed time, too, to get strong here." Clara reached over and squeezed his shoulder gently. "We all need time to grow strong, Jacob. Even the strongest-looking things started as seeds." As they finished planting, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The cabin looked warm and welcoming, smoke rising from the chimney lamplight beginning to glow in the windows. It was home in a way Clara's father's house had never been, in a way her house with Thomas had never been. "Tomorrow, we'll start building a proper trellis," Elias announced. "Can't have them growing wild." "Some wild things are beautiful," Clara said, thinking of the children of this life that had grown in unexpected directions. "True," he agreed. "But even wild things sometimes need support to reach their full height." That night, after the children were asleep and the cabin had settled into its nighttime quiet, Clara found herself on the porch with Elias watching the stars appear one by one. They sat in comfortable silence, the day's events settling around them like dust. "They won't come back," Elias said suddenly. "Thomas and your father. They're cowards at heart, and cowards don't return to places where they've been shown their true nature." "I know," Clara said. "I'm not afraid of them anymore. They already did their worst to me, and I survived it." "You did more than survive it," Elias corrected. "You transformed it into something else, into purpose." A wolf howled somewhere in the distance, and its pack answered their voices, creating a wild harmony that echoed off the mountains. Clara thought about Patricia's words about what would happen when the children were grown, when her purpose here had been fulfilled. "Elias," she began, then stopped, uncertain how to voice her thoughts. "I know," he said quietly. "I've been thinking about it too. The future. What happens next? And I don't have answers, Clara. All I know is that you belong here now. We'll figure out the rest as we go." It wasn't a declaration of love or a promise of forever in the way fairy tales meant it, but it was real, solid, true, like everything else in this life she was building. And for now, that was enough. The wolf's howl still echoed in Clara's memory when morning brought a crisis that would change everything. She woke to the sound of Elias's voice, urgent and frightened in a way she'd never heard before. Racing down the ladder, she found him kneeling beside Jacob, who lay twisted on the floor, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. "Fell from the loft," Samuel said, his young face white with fear. "He was trying to fix that loose board without waking anyone, and the ladder slipped." Jacob's face was gray with pain, sweat beading on his forehead as he tried not to cry out. At 14, he was caught between boyhood and manhood, and the struggle to be brave was written in every line of his rigid body. "We need Dr. Morrison," Clara said immediately, but Elias shook his head. "Can't move him like this, and the doctor's in town for the Anderson baby. Won't be back until tomorrow at the earliest." He looked at Clara with desperation. "Margaret knew how to set bones. She learned from her grandmother, but I never—" Clara knelt beside Jacob, her hands gentle as she examined the break. She'd watched Dr. Morrison set her student's arm once years ago, but watching and doing were vastly different things. Still, Jacob needed help now, not tomorrow. "Martha," she said with more authority than she felt, "bring me the willow bark tea as strong as you can make it. Samuel, we need straight boards for a splint check the woodpile. Rose, get all the clean cloth you can find." The children scattered to their tasks while Clara kept her hand on Jacob's forehead, speaking softly. "I know it hurts. We're going to fix it." "Can't," Jacob gasped. "You don't know how—" "Then we'll learn together," Clara said firmly. Sometimes that's all anyone can do, learn as they go and hope for the best. When Martha returned with the tea, Clara helped Jacob drink it, waiting for the pain to dull slightly. Elias held his son's shoulders while Clara examined the leg more carefully. It was a clean break, thank God, below the knee. She could see how the bones needed to align, could feel it almost instinctively. "This is going to hurt," she warned Jacob, "but I need you to trust me." The boy looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw the moment he decided. "Do it," he whispered. What followed was perhaps the longest few minutes of Clara's life. With Elias holding Jacob steady, she pulled the leg straight, feeling the bones shift back into alignment. Jacob's scream cut through her like a blade, but she didn't stop, didn't hesitate. Martha appeared at her side with the boards, and together they splinted the leg with an efficiency born of necessity. When it was done, Jacob had passed out from the pain, his face pale but peaceful. Clara's hands were shaking so badly she couldn't hold the cup of water Samuel offered her. "You did it," Elias said, his voice rough with emotion. "You saved him." "We don't know that yet," Clara said, but when Dr. Morrison arrived the next day, he confirmed that the bone was set perfectly. "Where did you learn to do this?" he asked, clearly impressed. "I didn't," Clara admitted. "I just knew what needed to be done." The doctor studied her for a moment. "Some people have healing hands, Miss Jennings. They know how to fix broken things because they understand breaking from the inside out." Jacob's recovery became the center of household life. He was a terrible patient, frustrated by his immobility, angry at his helplessness. But Clara weathered his storms with patience she didn't know she possessed, sitting with him through the long nights when the pain kept him awake, reading to him from the few books they owned until her voice went hoarse. It was during one of those nights when the pain was particularly bad, and Jacob couldn't stop the tears, that he said the word that changed everything. "Mama," he whispered, not to the memory of Margaret, but to Clara, who held his hand in the darkness. "Mama, make it stop hurting." Clara's heart broke and mended itself in the same instant. "I can't make it stop," she said softly, "but I can stay with you through it. Sometimes that's all mothers can do. Stay with their children through the hurt." "Is that what you are now?" Jacob asked through his tears. "Our mother." "If you'll have me," Clara whispered back. "Margaret was our mother," he said carefully. "She gave us life, taught us to walk and talk and be good people. But you—" He paused, searching for words. "You're teaching us how to keep living after loss. That's a kind of mothering too, isn't it?" Clara couldn't speak past the lump in her throat, so she just held his hand tighter. They stayed like that until dawn, when the pain finally eased enough for sleep. Word of Clara setting Jacob's leg spread through the valley like wildfire. Within a week, people were bringing her their minor ailments, cuts that wouldn't heal, coughs that lingered, sprains and strains. She protested that she wasn't a healer, but mountain folk were practical people. They'd seen what she did for Jacob, and that was enough. Mrs. Henderson arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, her face pinched with disapproval, and something else pained Clara realized. The woman's hand was wrapped in a dirty cloth, and when Clara carefully unwound it, she found an infected cut, angry and swollen. "I don't need your help," Mrs. Henderson said stiffly. The doctor's away again, and my husband insisted." Clara could have been petty, could have reminded the woman of her cruel words, her judgment, her gossip. Instead, she cleaned the wound with gentle hands, applied a poultice Martha helped her prepare, and wrapped it in clean cloth. "Come back in 3 days," Clara instructed. "Keep it clean and dry." Mrs. Henderson stared at her for a long moment. "Why are you helping me?" "After everything I said." "Because you need help," Clara said simply. "And because holding on to anger is like holding on to a hot coal, it only burns the one who won't let go." The woman left without thanks, but she returned 3 days later as instructed. The wound was healing cleanly. This time she lingered after Clara rewrapped her hand. "The whole town was wrong about you," she said quietly, "about what you're worth." "No," Clara corrected gently. "They were just measuring with the wrong scale." Summer arrived in a burst of green and gold, and with it came the first signs that the moonflowers might actually grow. Tiny shoots pushed through the soil, reaching for the sun with determination that felt personal to Clara. She tended them carefully, watering in the cool mornings, building up the trellis as they climbed. The children helped even Jacob on his crutches, which Dr. Morrison said he'd need for another month at least. They made it a family ritual, this tending of flowers that bloomed in darkness, and Clara began to tell them more stories about things that thrived in unexpected places. It was during one of these gardening sessions that Elias said something that stopped Clara's heart. "We should make it official," he said quietly, his hands busy training a vine. "You being here, the children calling you Mama, all of it." Clara's hand stilled on the leaves. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that you're already mother to these children in every way that matters. You're already the heart of this home." He paused, visibly struggling with words. "I'm not offering romance, Clara. That part of me died with Margaret. But I'm offering partnership, family, a legal claim to the life you've already built here." "You're asking me to marry you." Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm asking you to make official what already exists," Elias corrected. "To give you the protection of my name, the security of knowing this will always be your home. To give the children the mother they've already chosen." Clara thought about Thomas's proposal years ago, full of promises and passion that had turned to ash the moment she couldn't fulfill her biological purpose. This was different. No false promises, no pretense of feelings that didn't exist. Just truth, plain and simple. "What about love?" she asked. "There are different kinds of love," Elias said, finally meeting her eyes. "The love I had for Margaret was lightning, sudden, consuming, brilliant. What I feel for you is different. It's root-deep appreciation. It's trust. It's knowing that you'll be here tomorrow, that you'll tend what needs tending without being asked. Maybe that's not the love poets write about, but it's real and solid and lasting." Before Clara could respond, Rose's voice carried across the garden. "Papa, Miss Clara, come quick. Samuel's stuck in a tree." They found Samuel 20 feet up in a pine, frozen with fear, unable to climb up or down. Elias started to go after him, but his own fear of losing another family member made his hands shake. "I'll go," Clara said, already pulling off her apron. She'd climbed trees as a girl before propriety and marriage had clipped her wings. "Clara, no!" Elias started, but she was already climbing her skirts, hiked up in a way that would have scandalized proper society. The bark was rough under her hands, and sap stuck to everything, but she climbed steadily until she reached Samuel. "I'm scared," the boy whispered. "So am I," Clara admitted. "But we're going to be scared together going down, which is better than being scared alone up here." Step by careful step, she guided him down her body, shielding his smaller one until they reached the ground where Elias caught them both in an embrace that spoke louder than words. "Yes," Clara said against his shoulder. "My answer is yes." The wedding, if it could be called that, took place 2 weeks later in the cabin's main room. Pastor Williams from town officiated with only the children, and surprisingly, Mrs. Henderson and Dr. Morrison as witnesses. Clara wore Margaret's wedding dress, which Martha and Rose had altered to fit, insisting that their first mama would want their new mama to have it. The ceremony was simple, no flowers except the wild ones Rose picked, no music except the wind through the pines, no feast except the meal they all cooked together. But when Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, and the children cheered, Clara felt something settle in her chest that had been fractured since the day Dr. Morrison had first pronounced her barren. "You may kiss your bride," Pastor Williams said, and Elias leaned in to press a chaste kiss to Clara's forehead, a promise not of passion, but of protection, partnership, permanence. That night, after the witnesses had gone home and the children were asleep, Clara and Elias sat on the porch as they had so many nights before. Nothing had changed, really, except everything had. "I want you to know," Elias said quietly, "I don't expect that is Margaret's bed can remain yours alone. I'm content with my arrangements." Clara was quiet for a moment, appreciating his delicacy. "We're partners now," she said finally. "In all things. Maybe not tonight, maybe not soon, but eventually, partners share everything, don't they?" He looked at her with something like wonder. "You continually surprise me, Clara Boone." "Jennings was my father's name," she said firmly. "I'm a Boone now. We all are." August brought the full heat of summer and with it Jacob's release from his crutches. Dr. Morrison declared the leg fully healed, stronger even than before at the break point. "Bones are like that," he told Clara. Sometimes they grow back stronger where they've been broken. The moonflowers were climbing high now, their vines thick and healthy, though no buds had appeared yet. Clara tried not to feel disappointed after all they were growing, which was more than Margaret had achieved, but still, she longed to see them bloom, these flowers that had become symbols of so much more than mere plants. It was Rose who spotted the first bud, calling everyone to come see the tiny green promise wrapped tight against the vine. They watched it for days, checking morning and evening, until finally, on a night when the moon was full, Clara heard Rose's excited voice from outside. "It's opening, Mama, Papa, everyone, it's opening!" They gathered in the garden, still in their nightclothes, and watched by moonlight as the first flower slowly unfurled. It was magnificent, pure white, as big as Clara's hand, glowing in the darkness like a fallen star. The sweet fragrance filled the air, attracting moths that danced around the bloom like celebrating spirits. "It's beautiful," Martha breathed. "It was worth waiting for," Jacob added. "Just like Mama," Rose said, taking Clara's hand. Within a week, the entire trellis was covered in buds, and each night brought a show of flowers opening to the moon. People came from town to see them, these impossible blooms that everyone said wouldn't grow thriving under Clara's care. Thomas came once alone, stopping his wagon at the edge of the property to stare at the flowers that the family gathered in the garden at Clara, with Elias's arm around her shoulders and children clustered at her skirts. He didn't get down, didn't speak, just looked for a long moment before turning his wagon around and leaving. Clara never saw him again. September brought harvest time, and with it a test of a different kind. Elias was cutting timber on the high ridge when the accident happened. A tree fell wrong, catching him across the chest, breaking ribs, and leaving him struggling to breathe. The men who worked with him carried him home on a makeshift stretcher, their faces grim. Dr. Morrison came, immediately binding the ribs, giving instructions for care. "He'll live," he told Clara privately, "but it'll be a long recovery, and if fever sets in—" Clara didn't let him finish. She'd lost too much to lose this too. This man who'd given her dignity, this family, she'd helped rebuild this life she'd carved from sorrow. For 3 days and nights she didn't leave his side. When fever did come, she fought it with willow bark and cool cloths, with stubbornness and prayer. The children helped bringing water, keeping the fire going, taking turns reading to their father, even when he was too delirious to hear. On the third night, when his breathing was so labored that each breath sounded like a mountain being moved, Clara did something she hadn't done since the day she'd learned she was barren. She bargained with God. "You took my ability to create life," she whispered in the darkness. "Don't take my ability to preserve it. These children need their father. I need my partner. Please." Whether it was prayer or willow bark or pure determination, the fever broke at dawn. Elias opened clear eyes to find Clara asleep in the chair beside him, her hand clasped in his, the children curled up on the floor around them like puppies. "Clara," he whispered, and she jerked awake. "You're back," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You came back." "You wouldn't let me go," he said with a weak smile. "Heard you threatening me even in my dreams. Something about, if I died, you'd follow me to heaven and make my afterlife miserable." "I would have," she said fiercely. "We're partners, remember. Where you go, I go." His recovery was slow but steady. Clara managed the lumber contracts, handled the men, kept the household running while nursing him back to health. No one questioned her authority. She'd earned their respect setting Jacob's leg, and she solidified it by proving she could handle numbers as well as any man. It was during this time that Harold came for his final visit. He appeared one October morning when Elias was finally able to sit on the porch, though walking was still beyond him. "I came to apologize," Harold said without preamble, "and to give you this." He held out a small leather pouch. Clara didn't take it. "I don't want your money, Father." "It's not money," he said quietly. "It's your mother's wedding ring. The real one, not the one she gave you before. This one she hid from me, knew I'd sell it if times got hard. She wanted you to have it, but I was angry, ashamed. I kept it out of spite." Clara took the pouch, feeling the weight of the ring inside. "Why now?" "Because I heard what you did for the Henderson woman. For others too." Heard you saved your husband's life, your son's leg. Heard you grew those flowers everyone said were impossible. He paused, looking older than his years. I was wrong, Clara. About your worth. About everything. Yes, Clara said simply. You were. Harold flinched but nodded. Your mother, she wanted to come, but she's ill. Consumption, the doctor says. She doesn't have long. Clara felt the news like a physical blow, but her face remained calm. Thank you for telling me. Would you come see her before? He trailed off. Clara looked at Elias, who nodded slightly. I'll come, she said, but not for you, for her, and I'll bring my family. Harold's eyes widened as he took in the implication, all these children, his grandchildren now by law, if not blood. All of them. We're a package, Clara said firmly. Take us all, or have none of us. He nodded slowly. She'd like that. She always wanted grandchildren. After he left, Clara sat beside Elias on the porch, rolling the ring between her fingers. It was simple, just a gold band with a tiny chip of diamond, but it represented so much dreams, deferred love, complicated by hardship. The mother who couldn't stand up for her but had tried to provide for her in secret. We don't have to go, Elias said quietly. Yes, we do, Clara replied. Forgiveness isn't for them, it's for us. For the children to see that even the deepest wounds can heal, even if they leave scars. The visit to Clara's dying mother was both harder and easier than expected. Elizabeth wept. When she saw Clara, wept harder. When the children called her grandma at Clara's prompting, she held Rose on her lap, helped Martha with her embroidery, listened to the boys read all, while coughing blood into handkerchiefs she tried to hide. They're beautiful, she whispered to Clara. Your children. They are, Clara agreed, not bothering to explain the biology. These were her children in every way that mattered. I was weak, Elizabeth said on the last day of their visit. When your father said he would sell you, I should have fought, should have left him, but I was afraid of poverty, of shame, of being alone. You were surviving, Clara said, finding forgiveness she didn't know she possessed. We all do what we must to survive. Elizabeth pressed the wedding ring onto Clara's finger herself, her hands shaking with the effort. Be stronger than I was, she whispered. You already are. Elizabeth died 2 weeks later. Clara attended the funeral with her family standing straight and proud as people whispered about the barren woman who'd become mother to 4, the discarded daughter who'd become the backbone of the Boone family. Winter arrived early that year, November, bringing snows that isolated them for weeks at a time. But the cabin had never felt warmer, fuller of life. Jacob's leg had healed completely, allowing him to help his father with lighter work. Samuel had finally mastered reading and spent evenings devouring every book they owned. Martha had begun teaching Rose to sew, the two girls working by firelight on a quilt made from scraps of everyone's old clothes. It was during one of these cozy evenings that Clara felt it a flutter in her belly that she tried to ignore. It came again the next day, and the next until she couldn't deny what her body was telling her. But it was impossible. Dr. Morrison had said, Clara. Elias noticed her distress. What's wrong? I need to see Dr. Morrison, she said faintly. But I don't. It can't be. He helped her to town the next day through snow that was knee-deep in places. Dr. Morrison examined her with increasing amazement, checking twice, 3 times before sitting back with a stunned expression. It's impossible, he said, but you're with child, about 3 months along, I'd say. Clara's hand went to her stomach, to that flutter she'd been feeling. But you said, I was wrong, he admitted freely. Sometimes the body heals itself in ways medicine can't explain. Sometimes what we think is broken is just waiting. The journey home was silent, both Clara and Elias too overwhelmed to speak. It wasn't until they were inside with the children gathered for dinner that Clara found her voice. We have news, she said, her voice trembling. You're going to have a brother or sister. The explosion of joy that followed could probably be heard in town. Rose danced around the table. Samuel whooped loud enough to shake snow from the roof. Martha burst into tears of happiness, and Jacob serious. Jacob grabbed Clara in a hug that nearly lifted her off her feet. A baby, Rose kept saying, A real baby. You're all my real babies, Clara said, tears streaming down her face. This one will just be newer. That night, as they lay in the bed they now shared, Elias finally spoke what he'd been holding back. I love you, he said simply. Not like I loved Margaret. That was first love. Young love, the kind that burns bright and fast. This is different, deeper. You walked into our broken life, and instead of trying to fix it, you helped us rebuild it into something new, something that honors what was while embracing what is. I love you too, Clara whispered, for seeing worth where everyone else saw waste, for giving me children to mother when my body couldn't create them, for being patient while I learned to be brave. The moonflowers had long since died back with the frost, but Clara had collected their seeds, carefully storing them for next spring. As she drifted off to sleep, she thought about cycles of seasons of growth, of loss and renewal. Her hand rested on her still flat belly, where impossible life grew, while around her slept the children who'd made her a mother before biology caught up with her heart. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The pregnancy would be difficult. She was older now, and her body had been through so much. The children would need to adjust to sharing her attention. The town would have opinions about the barren woman suddenly with child. There would be complications, fears, moments of doubt. But tonight, in a cabin at the edge of the wilderness, Clara Boone, former Jennings, nobody lay surrounded by the family she'd earned through blood, sweat, and stubborn love. She'd been sold for $50, the price of humiliation and despair. But she'd purchased her place here with currency far more valuable: presence, patience, and the kind of love that grows in broken soil. The baby moved again, that flutter of promise, of future, of life, continuing despite all odds. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the garden, where moonflowers would bloom again come summer. Inside, the fire crackled in the hearth, and 5 hearts beat in rhythm, with hers the family symphony she'd never thought to conduct. Thank you, she whispered to the darkness, to God, to Margaret's spirit, to the universe that had seemed so cruel, but had actually been preparing her for exactly this moment, this life, this love, that wasn't lesser for being different. Tomorrow she would wake to children calling her mama, to a husband who valued her for more than her womb, to a life that had grown from the ashes of her devastation. But tonight she simply held the wonder of it all. The broken woman who'd become whole, not by being fixed, but by discovering that broken pieces, when fitted together with love and patience, could create something even more beautiful than the original design. The winter months passed, with Clara's belly growing rounder, defying every medical prediction that had once defined her worth. By March, when the snow finally began its retreat, she could barely manage the ladder to the loft, and the children had taken over most of her duties with a protectiveness that both touched and frustrated her. I'm pregnant, not dying, she told Martha one morning when the girl insisted on hauling all the water herself. Mama, you're 43 years old, having your first baby after being told you couldn't have any, Martha replied with her mother's practical wisdom. We're not taking chances. The truth of it sat heavy on Clara. Dr. Morrison had been visiting weekly, his face growing more concerned with each examination. The baby's healthy, he'd say, but you're not a young woman, Mrs. Boone. This birth, it won't be easy. Elias had grown quieter as her time approached, and she'd catch him watching her with eyes full of fear. She knew what haunted him. Margaret had died in childbirth, and here was his second wife, older and supposedly barren, attempting what had killed his first love. I'm not Margaret, Clara told him one night when his worry became too heavy to ignore. And this baby, this is different. This child was fought for, prayed for, impossible made possible. I won't leave you, Elias. I won't leave any of you. But promises were easier made than kept, and when labor began on a rain-soaked April morning, Clara understood why Elias had been so afraid. The pain was unlike anything she'd experienced, waves of agony that made setting Jacob's legs seem like child's play. Hour after hour passed with little progress, and she could hear Dr. Morrison's worried murmurs to Elias in the main room below. It was Rose who broke the rules, climbing the ladder, despite being forbidden, crawling into bed beside Clara, with her small face fierce with determination. You can't die, Mama, the little girl said firmly. You promised you were staying forever, and you don't break promises. Rose, sweetheart. No. Rose interrupted. When Jacob's leg was broken, you told him that sometimes all we can do is go through the hurt together. So that's what we're doing, all of us. And somehow the other children appeared Martha with cool cloths for her forehead. Samuel holding her hand with surprising strength, Jacob reading from the Bible in his steady voice. Even Elias abandoned propriety to kneel beside the bed, his weathered hand gentle on her sweat-soaked hair. We're here, he whispered. All of us. You're not alone in this. Perhaps it was their presence that gave her strength, or perhaps the baby simply decided it was time. Either way, as the sun broke through the rain clouds, casting the room in golden light, Clara's daughter entered the world with a cry that sounded like victory. A girl! Dr. Morrison announced, his relief palpable. Small but perfect. And Clara, you did it. You both made it through. They named her Hope because what else could they call a child who shouldn't exist, born to a woman who shouldn't be able to bear children into a family, built from broken pieces? Hope Boone, with her father's dark hair and her mother's stubborn chin, who would grow up surrounded by siblings who chose her just as they'd chosen Clara. The weeks that followed were a blur of exhaustion and wonder. Clara had thought she understood motherhood from raising the 4 children who'd claimed her, but the physical demands of an infant were different. Her body, which had betrayed her for so long, now worked overtime to nourish this tiny life. She leaked milk at inconvenient moments, her bones ached from the birth, and sleep became a distant memory. But the other children rallied around their new sister with touching devotion. Jacob fashioned a cradle that could rock with the push of a foot, allowing Clara to soothe the baby while teaching lessons. Samuel appointed himself Hope's protector, standing guard during her naps, as if wolves might suddenly appear in the cabin. Martha took over much of the cooking, her skills having improved dramatically under Clara's tutelage. And little Rose, who had first called her Mama, sang to Hope whenever she cried the same lullabies Clara had taught her. She's not replacing you, Clara assured them one evening when she caught a hint of uncertainty in their eyes. She's adding to us. Our family just keeps growing like the garden. Speaking of the garden, the moonflowers had returned with vigor that spring, their vines already climbing the trellis that had been reinforced over winter. But Clara had expanded beyond just moonflowers now. The plot that had once been Margaret's unsuccessful attempt at vegetables had been transformed into a thriving garden that seemed to defy the mountain's harsh conditions. She grew things that shouldn't flourish at this elevation, tomatoes that ripened despite the short-season squash that spread with unlikely enthusiasm, herbs that filled the air with fragrance. People from town began to visit just to see Clara's garden to ask her secret. There's no secret, well, she'd tell them, though that wasn't entirely true. The secret was understanding that gardens, like families, grew best when tended with patient love rather than desperate need. The secret was knowing that soil enriched by struggle often produced the strongest growth. It was in May, when Hope was just 6 weeks old, and the garden was exploding with life, that Thomas returned one last time. But this time he brought news that would change everything. "There's men coming," he said without preamble, standing at the edge of the property, as if afraid to come closer. "From the lumber company. They want to buy out all the small operations, including yours." Elias stepped forward, his hand instinctively going to the rifle by the door. "We're not selling." "They don't always ask twice," Thomas warned. "They've got legal ways of making things difficult. Blocking access roads, challenging property lines, undercutting prices until you can't afford to stay." He paused, his eyes finding Clara where she stood with Hope in her arms. "I thought you should know. Professional courtesy, one lumberman to another." "Why warn us?" Clara asked, studying the man who'd once discarded her so easily. Thomas was quiet for a moment, his face working through emotions he couldn't quite voice. "Because I was wrong," he finally said. "About everything. About what makes a woman valuable, what makes a life worthwhile. Patricia gave me 3 sons, but our home is cold, efficient, proper. Your home—" He gestured at the cabin where children's laughter spilled through the windows, where the garden grew wild and beautiful. "This is what I threw away." He left without another word, but his warning proved prescient. Within a week, 3 men in city suits arrived, their wagon out of place on the mountain road. Clara recognized the type she'd seen them in her father's store, men who measured everything in profit and saw people as obstacles to earnings. "Mr. Boone." The lead man, introducing himself as Mr. Garrett from Pacific Lumber Corporation, said smoothly, "We're prepared to make you a very generous offer for your land and timber rights." "Not interested," Elias said flatly. "You haven't heard our price," Garrett persisted. "Enough to set your family up properly in town. Your children could attend real schools, have opportunities." "My children attend school right here," Claire interrupted, stepping forward with hope in her arms. "Taught by someone who actually cares about their learning, not just their compliance." Garrett's eyes dismissed her instantly, a woman holding a baby clearly not worth addressing. It was a familiar dismissal, one she'd experienced countless times before. But this time, instead of shrinking, Clara smiled. "You should leave," she said pleasantly, "before the garden tour arrives." "Garden tour?" Garrett asked, confused. As if on cue, 2 wagons appeared on the road filled with women from town. It had started as an accident, Mrs. Henderson bringing her church group to see the moonflowers, but had evolved into a weekly event. Clara's garden had become famous throughout the valley, and women came to learn her techniques, buy her seeds, and simply marvel at what grew in seemingly impossible conditions. "Ladies," Clara called out cheerfully, "we have visitors from the Pacific Lumber Corporation. They're here to discuss buying our land." The reaction was immediate and fierce. These mountain women understood what corporate buyouts meant: husbands without work, families displaced, communities destroyed. They surrounded Garrett and his companions with the practiced intimidation of people who'd faced down bears and bitter winters. "You buyin' the Hendersons' place too?" one woman demanded. "What about the Millers, the Johnsons? You plan to clear cut like you did over in Millerville." Garrett tried to maintain his composure, but facing down a crowd of angry mountain women while surrounded by Clara's abundant garden proof that this land was loved, intended, not just exploited, cracked his confidence. "We'll be in touch," he said, stiffly retreating to his wagon. "Don't bother," Elias called after him. "The answer will always be no." But Clara knew men like Garrett didn't give up easily. Sure enough, within a month, strange things began happening. The road to town was blocked by accidentally felled trees. The price for lumber dropped precipitously, but only for small operations. The bank suddenly questioned the property lines, requiring expensive surveys. It was during this siege that Clara's garden became their salvation in an unexpected way. The women who visited began bringing more than just admiration. They brought business. They wanted Clara's vegetables for their tables, her herbs for their medicines, her flowers for their celebrations. What started as a garden became a thriving business that offset the losses from the lumber interference. More importantly, it created a network of allies. When Pacific Lumber tried to challenge the Boone's property rights in court, the entire valley showed up to testify. When they blocked the roads, the community worked together to clear them. When they tried economic pressure, the local families found ways to support each other. The battle came to a head in July when Garrett returned with what he clearly thought was his killing blow, a document suggesting that the original land grant to Elias was invalid due to a clerical error. "You have 30 days to vacate," he said triumphantly, "unless you're prepared to spend years and fortune in court." Clara looked at the document, then at Garrett's smug face, and made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. "Mr. Garrett," she said sweetly, "have you met Judge Patterson's wife, lovely woman? She was here just last week learning how to grow moonflowers. Her husband, the judge who would hear this case, was so pleased with the bouquet she brought home that he's commissioned me to plant a garden at the courthouse." Garrett's face paled slightly, but he rallied. "You can't influence a judge through his wife." "Oh, I wouldn't dream of it," Clara continued. "But Judge Patterson is very interested in preservation of family farms. His own grandfather was pushed off his land by a company much like yours. I'm sure he'll give your case all the attention it deserves." She paused, then delivered her final blow. "Of course, there's also the matter of those surveys you filed, the ones that show the creek running through our property. Curious thing that creek provides water to 6 other families downstream. If your surveys are correct, you're claiming water rights that affect the entire valley. I wonder how that will play in court." Garrett stared at her. This woman he'd dismissed, who stood there with baby sick on her shoulder and dirt under her fingernails, who had just expertly turned his weapon against him. "This isn't over," he warned. "Yes," Clara said firmly, "it is. Because here's something you don't understand, Mr. Garrett. This isn't just land to us. It's home. It's where my children learned to read, where my husband buried his first wife, where I discovered that barren ground can still produce abundance if you tend it right. You're fighting for profit. We're fighting for our lives. Who do you think will fight harder?" Garrett left and didn't return. Within a month, Pacific Lumber had moved on to easier targets, leaving the valley in peace. The victory felt larger than just one family defending their home. It was a community refusing to be consumed by corporate greed. That night, as the family celebrated with a special dinner, Jacob raised his glass of cider. "To Mama," he said simply, "who grows gardens and fights lumber companies and does impossible things before breakfast." "To our family," Clara corrected, looking around the table at these people who had become her world, "who stands together no matter what storms come." August brought the moonflowers into full bloom, and with them came a surprise visitor, Dr. Morrison, but not for medical reasons. He stood in the garden as twilight fell, watching the massive white flowers open to the night. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "A deeper one than I've offered before." "You've already apologized," Claire reminded him. "For my lack of compassion, yes, but not for my lack of vision." He turned to her, his face serious. "When I pronounced you barren, I thought I was stating a medical fact. But I've watched you these past 2 years, and I've realized something. I was so focused on what your body couldn't do that I couldn't see what your spirit could accomplish." He gestured at the garden, the cabin where children's voices carried on the evening air, Hope sleeping peacefully in Clara's arms. "You've created more life here than most fertile women ever do. You've grown a family from sorrow, a garden from impossibility, a community from isolation. You've made me reconsider everything I thought I knew about what makes a woman valuable." "We're all valuable," Clara said softly. "We just have to find the right soil to grow in." Dr. Morrison nodded, then surprised her by asking, "Would you consider teaching, not school teaching, but teaching women about healing, about herbs and remedies? I'm getting older, and this valley needs more healers. You have the hands for it, and more importantly, the heart." Clara thought about it as the moonflowers released their perfume into the night air. "I'll consider it," she said. "But I'd want to teach more than just healing. I'd want to teach women that their worth isn't measured by one standard, that there are many ways to nurture life." "That might be the most important medicine of all," so the doctor agreed. As autumn approached, the garden reached its peak abundance. Clara and the children spent days preserving food for winter, canning tomatoes, drying herbs, storing roots in the cold cellar. The work was hard but satisfying, made lighter by the constant chatter and laughter that now filled their home. It was during one of these preserving sessions that Martha made an announcement that stopped everyone in their tracks. "I want to go to the teaching college," she said quietly. "In the city. Mrs. Henderson says there's scholarships for mountain girls who show promise." The silence that followed was deafening. Martha at 17 was old enough to leave, but the thought of this family fragmenting was painful. Clara saw Elias's face close off the fear of loss returning. "That's wonderful," Clara said firmly, earning a shocked look from her husband. "You'd make an excellent teacher, Martha." "But the family," Martha began, tears in her eyes. "We'll always be here," Clara interrupted. "This isn't a cage, sweetheart. It's a nest. And nests are meant to launch birds who are ready to fly." Later that night, Elias confronted her. "How can you encourage her to leave? Because keeping her here out of fear would be another kind of death," Clara said gently. "We raise them to be strong enough to choose their own paths, Elias. That's what parents do. We give them roots and wings both." "Margaret would have fought to keep them close," he said roughly. "No," Clara said with certainty. "Margaret would have wanted them to flourish wherever that took them. She'd understand that love doesn't mean holding tight, it means holding steady while they explore how far they can grow." The first frost came early that year, ending the moonflowers' season, but not their impact. Clara had collected hundreds of seeds, which she packaged carefully with growing instructions. She sent them throughout the valley, and beyond each packet carrying a small note, "For gardens that bloom in darkness." Orders came from as far as San Francisco, women writing to say they'd heard of the barren woman who grew impossible gardens, asking for seeds and hope in equal measure. Clara filled each order personally, understanding that she was sending more than seeds. She was sending proof that beauty could grow from broken ground. Winter settled over the mountain like a familiar blanket, and the family drew close around the fire. Hope, now crawling everywhere, delighted in her siblings' attention. Martha worked on her scholarship applications with Clara's help, while the boys planned improvements to the garden for next year. Elias had built a greenhouse against the south wall of the cabin, determined that Clara's garden would have a chance to grow year-round. "Why?" Clara asked when he showed her the completed structure. "Because your garden saved us," he said simply. "Not just from Pacific Lumber, but from becoming closed off, isolated. Your garden brought the community to us, showed us we weren't alone." He paused, taking her dirt-stained hand in his calloused one. "You did that. You grew connections where I only saw boundaries." Christmas brought unexpected joy when Harold arrived with a wagon full of gifts and a humility Clara had never seen in him before. He'd sold his store, he explained, unable to continue in a place where everyone knew he'd sold his own daughter. "I'm moving to California," he said quietly. "Starting over. But I wanted to see you once more, to see—" He gestured helplessly at the warm cabin, the thriving family, the evidence of abundance everywhere. "To see what you built from the ashes I left you in." "We built," Clara corrected. "All of us together." Harold stayed for dinner, watching in wonder as this family operated like a well-oiled machine of love and chaos. When he left, he pressed a bank draft into Clara's hand. "Your mother's inheritance," he said. "She left everything to you. It's not much, but maybe it can help with Martha's schooling." After he left, Clara looked at the draft enough to send Martha to college and perhaps start that healing school Dr. Morrison had suggested. Money that came from pain but could be transformed into possibility. Spring returned with explosive force, the greenhouse having protected enough plants that the garden got an early start. Martha received her scholarship acceptance on the same day the first moonflower seedlings pushed through the soil. The synchronicity wasn't lost on anyone, one flowering beginning as another prepared to transplant. The healing school started small, just 3 women from town who wanted to learn Clara's methods. But word spread as word always did in the mountains, and soon Clara was teaching a dozen women how to set bones, brew medicines, grow healing herbs, and most importantly, how to see their own worth beyond what society measured. "You're all gardeners," she told them on their first day, standing in the abundant garden with Hope toddling between the rows. "Some of you grow children, some grow food, some grow communities. But we all grow something, and that growth is valuable whether it's recognized or not." Years passed like seasons, each bringing its own challenges and victories. Martha became a teacher, returning every summer with stories of the wider world. Jacob took over much of the lumber business, modernizing their operations while maintaining respect for the forest. Samuel discovered a gift for mechanics, eventually opening a shop in town. Rose grew into a healer, like Clara, taking over much of the teaching when Hope and the 2 more children who followed Clara's supposedly barren body produced 3 miracles total, demanded more attention. The garden expanded every year, eventually covering an acre of what had been rough mountain ground. It became legendary in the state, written about in newspapers, visited by agricultural experts who couldn't explain how Clara grew things that shouldn't thrive at that elevation and climate. "What's your secret, E?" they'd always ask. "Understanding that nothing is truly barren," Clara would reply. "Everything has the potential for growth. You just have to find what it's meant to grow." When Clara was 60, Elias 70, they stood in the garden on a summer evening watching their grandchildren chase fireflies between the moonflowers. Martha had brought her 3 children for a visit. Jacob's 2 were there as always, and even Samuel had driven up from town with his twin boys. Rose, unmarried by choice, but fulfilled by her healing work, directed the chaos with the same calm authority Clara had learned to wield. "Did you imagine this?" Elias asked, his arm around Clara's shoulders. Both of them weathered now, but still strong, still growing. "When you climbed into my wagon that day—" "No," Clara admitted. "I couldn't imagine anything beyond surviving the next day." She paused, watching Hope, now 17 and beautiful, teaching the younger children how to identify healing herbs. "But maybe that's the secret. We don't have to imagine the whole garden. We just have to plant one seed at a time and trust that something will grow." That night, as they had for 30 years now, the moonflowers opened to the darkness, their white faces glowing in the moonlight, releasing their perfume into the mountain air. They'd spread far beyond the original trellis climbing the barn, the greenhouse, even the cabin walls. What had started as a handful of failed seeds had become a living testament to the power of patient tending. Clara thought of Patricia, who'd visited once years ago, her face pinched with unhappiness, despite her 4 sons and prosperous husband. She'd stood in Clara's garden surrounded by abundance and asked with genuine confusion, "How did you get all this?" "You were barren, you were nothing." "I was never nothing," Clara had replied gently. "I was just planted in the wrong soil. When I found the right place to grow, I flourished. We all do, given the chance." The gravestone, when it came many years later, would read, as Elias had once promised, "Here grew everything she was never given, and all that she gave anyway." But that was still decades in the future. For now, Clara Boone stood in her impossible garden, surrounded by the family she'd grown from sorrow, watching moonflowers bloom in defiance of everything that said they shouldn't. The garden would outlive her, tended by generations who understood that the most beautiful things often grew from the hardest ground. Children would play where moonflowers climbed, learning that broken didn't mean worthless, that barren was just another word for potential waiting to be discovered, that love planted with patience could grow gardens that never truly died. In the ending that was really a beginning, Clara looked at what she'd grown, not just plants, but people, not just a garden, but a legacy of resilience. She'd been sold for $50 as damaged goods, but she'd purchased her place in the world with courage, tenderness, and the radical belief that everyone deserved to bloom. The moonflowers glowed in the darkness, and Clara smiled, knowing that sometimes the most profound gardens were the ones that grew, not in spite of the darkness, but because of it. Her hand found Elias's weathered fingers intertwining as they stood in the garden that had grown from impossible seeds, in the family that had grown from broken hearts, in the love that had grown from letting go of what should be to embrace what was. And in that mountain garden where moonflowers bloomed against all odds, and broken people had built something whole, the truth was as clear as starlight. Some gardens never die because they're planted not just in soil, but in souls. And souls, Clara had learned, were the most fertile ground of all.